Um, so up next is Bryan Schackmann, also known as the Shackman, and he is a minister out from Los Angeles, California, at Glendale Church of Christ. When I was first starting out as a preacher, as a young preacher, I called him up to ask him advice on what to do day in and day out, how to prepare for a sermon, how to preach and minister and care for a church. And as he was telling me what his weekly routine was, I don't know if he still practices this. I would like to hear from you, Bryan. But you said that you would take Wednesday as a day that you would fast and you would pray for your church. And I've asked many when I first started out, and I still do. I ask ministers and preachers like, how do you spend your time? And I don't think I received any feedback that that included such a large segment of prayer in their ministry. Um, and that's profound because that's obviously what's needed, uh, especially from a minister. I also want to note that Bryan, as Nathan alluded to, is in mourning right now because he is a LA Dodgers fan, and as God has called us to mourn with those who mourn, I I agree for you, Bryan. But Bryan, I welcome you here to the 24 hours of prayer, and I look forward to hear what you have to say. But before you speak, let me pray over you, your congregation, and what you have for us. So, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for my brother Bryan. Thank you. I wish that we were in the same building tonight. I wish uh, that our paths would cross again physically, not just virtually. I pray that you're with him. The word that he has for us, I pray that you would infuse him with your spirit. May love, joy, peace just radiate from him and from his words. I pray that we are drawn closer to you, into your word, into the gospel. And I pray that his words would glorify your name. Be with his church, be with his ministry, protect him from the evil one, and may you bless his congregation. It's in the name of Christ that we ask. Amen. All right, Bryan, if you can go ahead and turn your video on. We'd love to see your face.
It
I don't know if you're crying, so you don't want to show your face, which I totally
it
understand.
it was blocking me for a second, but now I'm good. I'm good.
Oh,
So
okay, okay.
yeah, thank you for that introduction, Todd. That's very sweet of you. Uh, I don't pray like the whole day. Maybe I oversold a little bit. I pray for about an hour of that day. I have other work to do when I do that fasting on Wednesdays, but it still is a real grounding routine for me and something that's really sacred and something that I think really helps me as I attempt to minister to my congregation as well as I can. And it's a humbling time when God really convicts me of things. I think teaches me things to say over the weekend in sermons, things like that. So I'm really thankful that I started doing it. It's been a blessing in my life for sure. But I'm so honored to be with you tonight and just to share a bit of time. I have been thinking of first just to say outside of a Dodger fan, which is a big part of who I am. But honestly, at this point, we are so used to losing that we're used to it. So just every year it's going to happen, unfortunately. But outside of that, I have a wonderful wife named Mandy and two great kids. Carter is 8 and Nora is 4. And I turned 40 this year in December. So I'm not the young preacher anymore, which is weird. I was always that, I felt like, but I'm now losing my hair and all that stuff. So I'm not really a young preacher anymore. So transitioning out of that identity and figuring out what's next. But I'm really thankful for the church that I work with. I am just really blessed. I've been here for 15 years, and it happens to be my home congregation. So that is a real rare thing to have the opportunity to work at your home congregation. I'm really thankful for that. So I've been doing a series that is just really in my head over the last few weeks, and I want to just open with a moment of meditation over a foundational passage from that series, and it's the beatitude that Jesus speaks. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. I just want to say that again to you. I'm going to turn my video off for just a minute and just want you to think about what that means, what God's speaking to you in that. And I'll do that for about a minute. I just want you to process what God might be teaching you with that. So, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. All right, I'll be back in just a second. So I hope that time and processing stirred your heart a little bit. When Jesus says that, I think it's fascinating, and it's right at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, which is arguably, I mean, I think some of Jesus' most profound teachings. And he begins with these Beatitudes and opens up this new reality, and then is going to teach practically about how to live. But when he says that idea, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Often when we think about relationship with God, we think about it like after we die and having like, an interaction with God in like a heavenly realm. But when Jesus says it, it's in the present tense. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are you when you can find some purity in your heart, when you can get rid of all the junk, whatever that happens to be, because you have the opportunity to see and experience God, not in some reality someday, but right now. And I know this is true. I was blessed to be a part with Todd of a contemplative prayer ministry that Randy Harris taught us through contemplative prayer, and he would give us a week basically, and we'd spend a bunch of time in the afternoons just praying. And in those times, it doesn't always last for very long, but in those moments when you push away the distractions, I think we all know that we can have experiences with something that feels beyond ourselves. We can experience our creator, and we get to partner with that. And I think then we get a distraction because we live a very distracted life. So we have something that comes up, and after 30 seconds or so, we're moved on in a different direction. But it is so profound when we have those moments. And what would it look like for you to purify your heart in such a way, and to simplify, to take something out of your life so you could more clearly see God in your present moment? I imagine that if we were to have a conversation with everyone in this room, you would probably do the thing that most of us do. If we were to talk about our priorities, we'd say, God, Jesus, and we'd say those things because, come on, you guys are on the 24-hour prayer call. I mean, you guys are living the life. So you're into it. You're on the East Coast, like the 10 p.m. session. I mean, that's real hardcore. So like, we would all probably say it if we're on this call. Like, yeah, no, that is a priority for me. See, like, being with Jesus, being with God is really important. But what would it look like for you? And I know this like steps on my toes when I ask this question. What would I need to take out of my life or practice differently so I might see God more clearly? And what would it look like if I was to like truly say to Jesus, all right, Jesus, you take the wheel of my life for a minute. What do I need to change? Where do I need to make an adjustment? Where do I need to move in a different direction? Where are you calling me to take a different step? And I don't think we really want to ask that question because we don't want to get the answer to that question. But it's an opportunity that I think we all have, and something that we need to take Jesus up on from time to time. So for this time, for the next 30 minutes or so, I just want to talk with you about simplicity, which is this idea that we've been sharing in our church over the last several weeks, and we'll continue to for the next several. And this idea is a Christian idea that has been practiced forever, and it's basically from this concept of, if you really could serve God with all of your heart and your life and your soul and your strength, as the Old Testament would say, like, what would that look like if you could have a holistic focus on God and who God is? Like, what would change? I think of the story in Luke chapter 17. If you want to go to Luke 7, or not Luke 17, Luke 12. Luke 12, starting in verse 13. A man comes up to Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide my inheritance up with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" And I love this. Like, this guy comes up, he's got some sort of family issue, and Jesus is like, "Nope, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to talk about your family drama. Don't bring me into that situation. Why you're mad at your brother-in-law and all that stuff. Don't bring me into the situation. Oh, your brother owes you some of the inheritance. I don't want to talk like zeros. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm not interested in that conversation." But then he continues and he says a word for all of us. "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions." And what Jesus does here is he gives a double warning. And if we are to be Jesus people, like, we need to really pay attention. Like, our antennas need to go up when Jesus says, like, watch out and then be on your guard. I mean, he's like saying, you got to be really careful about this one. And then he says, life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. And as Western Americans, I'm not sure we really believe that. I know we're talking to people in different parts of the world a little bit, but I think predominantly we're Western Americans. I don't know that we really believe in. And he goes on to tell this parable about this man. And he begins it from the very get-go, letting you and I in on the story. He says that a man had an abundant harvest, and it was the land of him that produced that harvest. It's easy for us when we're working hard, and it's hard to work. I mean, I imagine some of you work 60 hours a week. You're working hard at your job. It's easy to start to think that whatever it is that is in your life, whatever the blessings are that in your life, it start to feeling like they just are owed to you, right? But from the very beginning, this story is telling you, like, the ground of a certain man produced this harvest. And again, you work hard for your job, you work hard for your money. I know that you do. But sometimes when you think about it, like, well, some of us had the opportunity to do 7 years of school to do the job that we do. Now, that's insane. I mean, I got a law degree for religion, basically, to do the job that I do. 7 years of school. Someone else was taking care of everything, basically. I mean, I had a couple like side jobs while I was doing that stuff, but somebody was taking care of a lot. There were scholarships that were given to me. There were opportunities that I had. Perhaps your high school wasn't the greatest high school, but think about education worldwide, the opportunities that you had. The ground of a certain rich man gave this abundant crop. And this rich man, he suddenly has this problem. I have so much crop. I need to build a bigger barn so I have room to store it. I have so much stuff that I need a bigger barn to store it all. I don't know about you, but that sounds like me from time to time. And you, if you were to live with me day to day, like I'm not somebody who has just like a ton of stuff. I'm definitely not the person who's like getting all the new gadgets, but it's amazing how much stuff I have. And Jesus reminds me life doesn't consist with that stuff. Perhaps you're familiar with Marie Kondo, who has a couple seasons of her show on Netflix. And she encourages people to look at their stuff and ask the question, like, does this spark joy for me or not anymore? She has a show. There are many others. There's like Hoarders and there's tons of those type of shows. Sometimes I think we watch them just to feel a little bit better about ourselves because like at least I'm not like that person. But in reality, like we all have a ton of stuff. There's a man who was extremely influential who probably you have never even heard of. His name is Edward Bernays, and he was famous. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And Freud is responding to the age of enlightenment and ration and reason. And he basically says, sure, like we think that we're reasonable, and every decision that you make, like you think that it's reasonable, but really like humans make irrational, unreasonable decisions all the time. And you just have to find a way to manipulate those. And so that concept was used by Bernays and others in World War I and World War II to create an unbelievably effective propaganda machine, both on the side of the US and the side of the Germans. And they were extremely successful. And then after the war's over, they thought, like, what if we applied these wartime concepts to just regular life and regular people? And one of the men named Jay Flazer, who ended up finding Lehman Brothers, he said that we need to move the United States from a needs economy to a wants economy. We have to capitalize on everybody's desires. Think about it. And that's how we are advertised to all the time. We're told that we need to let our desires be met. And basically, the gist of today's world is as long as you aren't hurting somebody, you should be able to do whatever you want. But unfortunately, that's not a very healthy or helpful way to live. In fact, in the Old Testament, the worst thing that happens is when God gives the people exactly what they want. At times, God's like, all right, whatever. I'm tired of you all begging for a king. Whatever. Just go for it. Just see how that works out for you. And that's what happens. Like we end up living with just our desires and living for these things. And it ultimately, Jesus would say, life isn't found there. True, deep, meaningful life isn't found there. And I think of that rich man who he tells the story about. Got a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to build a bigger barn. That's a good solve to the problem. In the United States, the average home in the 1950s had around 10,000 items in it. Our average homes have around 200,000 items in them. The fastest growing industry in the United States is storage units, because we don't even have enough space to store our stuff. There's enough storage unit space in the United States to sleep every resident in the US. And that's not those without homes. Every resident in the US could sleep in our storage facilities. Because they've gotten really good at working on your desires. And they've gotten even more and more sophisticated with technology. When I was traveling for a few weeks recently, I wanted my kids to remember me when I came back. Of course they would have, but I wanted them to remember me fondly while I was away. And I got them Reese's Puffs cereal. Any Reese's Puff cereal fans out there? It's definitely something you should probably only eat as a kid, but I got it for them, and I was like excited they were going to have the opportunity to try Reese's Puffs. And so I went on the trip. I come back, and hardly any of them were eaten. And so I said, kids, like, why don't you eat the Reese's Puffs? And they said they didn't actually like them. So of course I start eating Reese's Puffs for breakfast for a week or so. And I mean, I can't make them go to waste. And I was eating some, and just a few minutes later, I had an ad for Reese's Puffs on the side of my screen. And I did not say Reese's Puffs. I didn't talk about Reese's Puffs. Now that I've said it this many times, I'm just going to see it everywhere. But like, I have no idea where all of a sudden, like, they're advertising Reese's Puffs to me. It's just getting more and more sophisticated. And I know that you might be the one, and I feel like I'm that way at times. Like, I'm the one who's like out of the matrix, and I'm not manipulated. but we all are. Our world has been. Perhaps you've had the experience of moving. Almost everyone that I've ever helped to move, they say the process of moving makes them realize one thing: we have so much stuff. And I know for us, we lived in a really small place, a very small 2-bedroom place in LA. And when we moved into the place that we're in now, which has 4 bedrooms, I remember just walking around thinking, there's no way we can fill up all these spaces. It's just impossible. Like, it's unbelievable how much space we suddenly have. And now, 3 years later, partly because of this series, I'm going back through and cleaning up these things, and we filled everything. Like, it's just unbelievable. There's just stuff keeps coming. The problem is, I just don't think we believe Jesus on this, and it doesn't really lead you to a deeper, more meaningful life. Life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. There's a sociologist named David Kinnaman, and he says this: upward mobility often ends not in satisfaction and peace, but in exhaustion, disappointment, and emptiness. The word frugality, which is a word, you can use the word frugal to describe somebody from time to time. It's like a nice way of saying that they're cheap. So my wife will call me frugal from time to time because I can show that tendency. But the word frugal comes from the Latin word for frux, which means fruit. The idea of frugality originally was this idea of, like, look at your life and look at your stuff and limit yourself and limit your stuff and your consumption in such a way that it would produce a certain kind of fruit in your life. Because getting more and more isn't really all it's cracked up to be. I think of the parable that Jesus tells about the soil, where he talks about how some seed falls on rocky soil and it ends up growing for just a second, but then it gets choked out. Some falls on the path and even get started. And then there's some that fall into soil that actually produces something, like a plant grows out of it. And I love that parable. And it's interesting because Jesus then explains it to his disciples. Like, he has them gathered later, just a few verses after he tells the parable, and he's like, let me go ahead and run that back, because Peter, I could tell you didn't get it the first time. And so let me talk that through. And I actually wish that Jesus did that for a couple of his other parables, because a couple other ones are a little more confusing than this one. I felt like I could have gotten that one without the little extra, but Jesus comes back to just say, like, just FYI, like, this is what I was telling you back there. And it's so interesting to note, and you are likely very familiar with that parable. If you've been to church for a while, the idea of the soil and everything. But Jesus says in Matthew 13:22, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. The deceitfulness of wealth. That's interesting, isn't it? If I was to give a story, perhaps, if I was to be thinking of, okay, how would I describe people that fall away from church, or people that are in my church for a while and now they're not anymore? I think I would go to something else first. But Jesus is very consistent on this. He talks about money and possessions and stuff all the time. In fact, some people say it's as many as 1 in 4 of the things that Jesus teaches. And what's interesting about Jesus, and I understand that unfortunately churches, we see abuses of wealth and all that stuff within churches. Today it just happens. We see those things go on, but at the end, Jesus, as he's teaching about wealth and money and possessions and all these things, he doesn't say, all right, and please make your checks out to Jesus Ministries Incorporated. If you do, you can get a tax write-off at the end of the season. Hey, let's pass the plate again. Like that's not what Jesus is doing it for. It's because he knows it gets our hearts. He knows it's after our hearts. And I know that as I speak to this group, you guys are probably just across the economic spectrum. Some of you maybe have very little. Some of you are loaded. If you're loaded, please contact me. I'd love to talk to you about my church and my ministry. I'm kidding. But I'm talking to people across the economic spectrum right now. But what's interesting to think about is Jesus talks about wealth and stuff to people who during that time, they're mostly the people that he's speaking with are a Jewish audience, and the Jews at that time are occupied by Rome. They are oppressed, and there's a reason why they hate tax collectors, because tax collectors had sold out to Rome. They were Jewish people who had sold out to Rome, but they are heavily taxed and oppressed. Some historians would estimate that the Jews are taxed at about 80% of their pay. So about 80% was going directly to Rome. And Jesus is speaking to that audience. And he says, hey, you need to watch out for your possessions. And if I'm in that audience, I'm like, all right, this must be for somebody else. Like this must be for someone else. Like, thanks, but I this got to be for someone else. But I think that learning to practice simplicity and this way with Jesus of looking at our stuff in a certain way and asking like deep questions about it. Like, can I give this away? How could I use what I've been giving as a blessing and not just keep holding it? Because we have the opportunity to use what we have as a gift, to see it as a gift from God, to enjoy it, to use it, and perhaps to give it away. This trip that I just took with my wife, like I said, I'm turning 40 in December, so we took a trip for a few weeks, and we went to Europe. My sister lives over there, and so went to a few cities. We're on trains, and there was one time that we were going from one place to another, and when we ended up at the next location, we didn't remember if it was like she was carrying the stuff or I was carrying the stuff, but we had left behind a bag that had just a few of my dirty clothes. Like we had done a lot of laundry, and so there's like just a few of my dirty clothes were left. And I realized that in that bag that we had lost were 2 of my polos that I wore pretty regularly at church. And so I realized like, oh, well, I mean, it's not a big deal. I'll just buy some more when I get home. And it's so interesting that was my knee-jerk response. Like, oh, I've got a problem. And I wasn't like ready to buy them in that moment, but it was like I could like feel my hand like reaching for my wallet. I've got a problem. Oh, I'm gonna just have to go buy a couple polos. And I came home after the trip and I looked in my closet and I still had 6 more polos. And how many polos does one person need? Jesus would say to me, life doesn't consist in the abundance of polos. I told that story at my church, and my very kind elder came up to me at the end and he said, well, we all hope that you lost your pink polo, but I still have the pink one. It's actually salmon, and I'm going to wear it in a few Sundays and just say that one is still here. But I know that it's easy for us as we think about wealth and possessions. Yeah, thank you for the comments. The pink one survived. I'll send you guys a picture when I wear it next. But when it comes to these types of conversations, it's easy to think about the uber wealthy or the people that athletes, these people who are just making so much money. But in reality, like, we have the opportunity to see our stuff in different ways, and to think about how we then can use it to be a gift in the world. There's a sociologist from France named Jean Bourdieu, and she said, in the Western world, materialism has become the dominant system of meaning. She goes on to say, atheism hasn't replaced Christianity. Shopping has. And I think about that. Because just like I said with the polo story, like, how many times do I have a problem that's solved by Amazon.com? And it's so inconvenient to like have to go and get a credit card or something. So like, we're going to make it easy for you. Just buy it in one click. Don't even worry about it. Just make it easy on yourself. Shopping is such a hassle, right? It takes a lot of time. Just do it from the comfort of your couch. And we are always right here, right? It's always right here and it's available. And that just becomes, honestly, what we really start to believe in. It's my credit card that'll solve my problem. I just need to get more polos. But Jesus says to you, and he says to me, life, true, real life, isn't found there. One thing that Jesus says that I always struggle with is, he says, you can't serve both God and money. And that's another one, like that parable of the sower and the seed. It's like, wait, no, wouldn't it be you can't serve both God and the devil? Or wouldn't it be you can't serve both God and like evil forces? Or I mean, it's just interesting to think about that when Jesus says it, like, that's how he says it. You can't serve both God and money. And for the follower of Jesus, we should all be thinking, not how can I get more, but how can I live with less? And as I mentioned, one of the great lies of our world today is that doesn't matter what you do, as long as it's in the not hurting anybody else, just live out your desires, do what you want to do. Because ultimately, that leads us, I think, to more selfish living and more storage units being built, and less connection. Another element of this that I've been thinking about is, like, simplicity can be really expanded. It's really be awesome to have coffee with y'all and have a long conversation about this. But simplicity can be expanded to so many different things. Something that I've been thinking about as I've been kind of preparing these sermons is simplicity of speech. And there's a reason why monks and nuns oftentimes will just not allow speaking for like long periods of time, because oftentimes those of us, I think especially those of us who consider ourselves to be religious, we do a really good job of sinning while speaking. I've seen, I personally, I haven't seen the church deal like with a destructive murder. I've seen our church has dealt with some affairs which haven't been good, but I've seen like on a just a week to week basis, like what kills my church more than anything is gossip. And it's not super malicious. Like these people, they don't intend to. And I do it at times. It's got bless their heart right in front of it, but we're really good at using our words to hurt others. And I think about how in monasteries, it's like, nope, you can't talk. I mean, some are so extreme, you can't talk at all. It's like, all right, you can talk for 3 hours a day. Like, enjoy that time. Because for us, it's like, yeah, let's just talk as much as we want to. Let's text whoever we want to. Let's just get information out there. Let's put whatever we need to all over the place. And it's interesting how our world, I think, gives us more and more of an illusion of control than we definitely actually have. It's sometimes, I think, really humbling to just sit and realize like the things that are most important in your life and my life, we have like zero control over. But when it comes to texting and things like that, like we think that we have control. There was a young girl in our church who was having a dance recital, and I was texting her and her mom, getting the information on the recital and all that. And I was texting with her, and she said, "Okay, I'm glad that you're coming, but just FYI, like I hurt my back today, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to dance as well as I normally would have." And I said, "Okay, great, sounds good. Hope your back's okay." And I get there and I see the show, and it was wonderful. I mean, I couldn't tell. I don't know if you can tell that much about me from just a little screenshot, but I don't know dance at all. It's not really in my repertoire. Todd knows dance, but I don't. And so I wouldn't have been able to tell if she did well or bad. I mean, I guess I might have been able to tell if she did horribly bad. And like, she knocked somebody over. I think I might have been able to tell that. But like for me to go in and be like, oh, that was good or that was bad, I had absolutely no idea. But I walked away from that thinking about how if I was in high school, I would have done the exact same thing. Because I was on the high school baseball team, and I use on the high school baseball team in air quotes because I was there for the games, but I watched most of them. And I remember that when people would come to my game, sometimes I would be embarrassed because I hardly ever played. And I was thinking on my way home from this dance recital, if texting would have been available to me at that time and somebody would have reached out and said, "Hey, Bryan, I just want to let you know I'm coming to your game," I would have said, "Oh, just FYI, probably won't get in there today. My arm's hurting a little bit. Had a really big pitching day the other day. Don't look up the stats or anything, but sorry, or the coach doesn't like me." And I was thinking about like if I was in high school, I would have used that. And I started thinking, goodness, I use that all the time. Let me just tell you my side of the story. Let me fill you in on what really happened. Let me tell you what's going on with this person or with that person. We Christians need to think about simplicity of speech. And it might be a good practice for us every once in a while to just shut up spiritually. to slow down and to recognize again that the most important things in your life and my life, they're outside of our control. And if you try to use your tongue to control your kids, and I'm a parent, my son's getting to 8, and it's starting to feel like real parenting now, where it's like, whoa, it's harder. I'm realizing just how little control I can have over my tongue at times, as far as just like really just trying to find ways, the brother previous to me said, to encourage. I think about how in the book of James, James is the brother of Jesus. He spends a ton of time talking about the tongue. This is somebody, again, who at first wasn't even convinced that Jesus was who he said he was, but he is intimately close to Jesus in his ministry. And he just says over and over again, watch your tongue, be careful. And there's a part where he says, those of you who are pastors, you should be really careful about this. And those of you who aren't like full-time pastors, you're like, whew, thank you. Todd, Bryan, you all have to deal with that. Good luck. I'll just be in the pews chilling here. But then like he continues and says, let me just tell you about the tongue. And it's not just for pastors anymore. This is for everybody. And something that I have realized and come to think of it is like we all have a pulpit. And every day in our interactions, especially with the people that we love the most, like these types of interactions, the things that we say, like we're preaching to them. And whether you like it or not, and whether you're in full-time ministry or you're not, you're preaching to everybody. And at the end of your life, your lasting impact is probably going to be more around your words than your deeds. I think both are important. But especially as you think about legacy and the next generation, and 100%, I'm telling you, I'm preaching to myself on this. But we all need to think about how we could be a little bit more simple in our speech, and to recognize that there is no control that we can have about a given situation, whether it's parenting and saying words over our kids, or stressful situations at work. Because the problem is, if you become like a gossip and you're constantly trying to like use your words to control and manipulate situations, you're going to start to believe that everybody's doing that. And you're going to start to believe that other people aren't trustworthy either, because if you're doing it, then it must mean that everybody else is as well. And it starts to create a world that you don't really want to live in. So I've kind of gone a couple different paths with simplicity tonight, but what's the place in there for you maybe? And perhaps, as you think, I'm sure there's going to be many other challenging things that are said, way better said than mine tonight. But what is a step towards a pure heart that you might take? A friend of mine, he, towards the end of the year, for the last like 6 weeks of the year, he changes all the clothes around in his closet and puts the hanger a certain way. And then by the end of that year, the things that he hasn't worn over that 6-week period, because when he wears something, he switches the hanger around. Anything that he hasn't worn, he just gives away. Perhaps for you, it's just looking at your budget for the first time in a long time. just saying, where is all the money going, and how could I use this to give something away? Because of this series, as I mentioned, we are currently cleaning out our stuff. Maybe that's what you need to do. Go through, act like you're moving, and you're not moving, but just act like you're moving. Go through and see what you have, see what you can give away, and to bless to someone else. Maybe you practice not talking for a while. See if you can get through 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And there's all these invitations that we have to talk, whether it's to coworkers or to friends through text messages, and we're just talking and talking and talking. I know that, like, we all, I think there's a collective fear in the US that there's just no one's talking to each other. We're all talking past each other, and we sometimes need to start the practice ourselves of really thinking about how we use our speech. Maybe for you, it's something that you can, like, really donate. Maybe you have 2 cars and you can go down to 1. I mean, just how could you use your stuff as a blessing? Because as it comes to these matters of our heart, again, Jesus isn't after our money or our stuff. He's actually after our heart. Richard Foster writes a great book. I highly recommend any of his writings, but he wrote a book specifically on the Christian practice of simplicity. And he defines simplicity this way: an inward reality of a single-hearted focus upon God and his kingdom, which results in an outward lifestyle of modesty, openness, and unpretentiousness, and which disciplines our hunger for status, glamour, and luxury. I love that inward reality. And as I said at the very beginning, I imagine that if you're here on the prayer call, you are somebody who would say that, God and Jesus are very important to you. And that's great. But okay, then, like, what does that look like? What step towards simplicity might Jesus or God call you to do? And it's probably Jesus or God calling when it's something you don't really want to do, or you don't feel like you have the strength to do it. And God's like, yep, that's why I chose that one. Like, that's why. Like, we all have these little g gods in our lives that we're bowing down to. The thing is, it's not about the stuff. It's about our hearts. Again, I just love for you to think about that verse: blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Jesus says it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. And I know at times, like when we, say a crossword with somebody or something comes out, which we, oh, well, that's not really me. But Jesus would say, yeah, it is. It's in there somewhere. Sometimes we need to really do some hard work to say, all right, what would it look like for me to, like, truly simplify my heart, to purify myself so I can be more in line with Jesus and with God. And again, I think it's so amazing that this is in the present tense. This is a verse about connecting with God and God's spirit and presence more and more now. One thing that I get the opportunity to do as a pastor is minister to all kinds of people. And I try my best, even though I fail, to love all kinds of people. But it is interesting as a pastor to interact with people who've been Christians for a long time, people who are, older. And sadly, there are some people in our church, like, at times, that I would say, are you actually a Christian? I don't feel like you're like you're here every week and you talk about this every week, but you're kind of mean. Like you're like Christian mean, which is the worst because you've been at it for a while. And some of these people, bless their heart, I love them, but I I I there's one lady who's many years ago, so don't look her up. She's long dead, but she used to always say like, I just don't understand why my kids won't come to church. And I'm just like, I don't think I would either. Like I got to be honest with you. Like I don't know. I don't know that I would like it's are you growing? And like oftentimes when it comes to a Christian walk, it's us showing up week after week and taking communion and saying, all right, God, sorry, I did that again. Like, and God's like, all right, like you confessed this to me, 50 weeks in a row, but like, do something, go. Like, oftentimes, like we kind of know some things that would help us purify our hearts. Goodness, the people around us, how much could they benefit from someone who's regularly seeing God? I think about Randy Harris, a mentor of Todd and mine. Like he's somebody who proves the existence of God to me because we call him jokingly the Church of Christ monk because he's celibate and he's just given his life to like deeper pursuits in prayer and then now to teach us young people how to pray. And it's just incredible to be with him because you just when you're with him, it's like you're just tapping into something deeper. Like there's something that Randy has that's rare. And when you're with him for a little bit, it's just like it's just amazing. And we preachers joke about like that he'll sometimes tell us a story, and even if it's a joke, and there's just sometimes then you like try to like retell it because preachers retell some stuff here and there, right? Always get credit, but we retell some stuff here and there. But with Randy, like you try to retell it and it just doesn't work the same. It's because he has a certain sort of presence about him. And I just wish and hope that the people who I love and spend time with would say the same about me. That I would live with a holistic focus on God and who God is. And that would make me better. That I would purify stuff out of my life. So those are my thoughts. Todd, you mentioned maybe coming on and chatting for a couple minutes at the end. I super appreciate you all listening to me and I just being with us on this call tonight. It's a blessing to be with you guys.
On behalf of everybody, Bryan, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, several things that you said were convicting for me. I know, like most preachers, when James talks about the tongue, it stands out to us, obviously, because we use it so often.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, we're pretty careless. I from the get-go, I even texted this, the meditation that you had to start off with. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. What, like where I went with my meditation is to be pure in heart. Like, what do you think Jesus is getting at? Like pure, like motives, pure, what is like free of sin? Like what do you think Jesus?
Yeah,
What do you think?
that's a great question. I think it deserves, some more thought. I mean, just personally in my study and understanding of it, it is, I'd say both, but it's about just a pureness. Like, I mean, Jesus talks about having like a childlike faith, like a childlike presence where, the motives are removed, all the stress. And again, I think it gets to the parable of the sower and just like the cares of this world. Like, how often are we thinking about stuff or there's just even 2 years from now, is it really going to matter? Even 2 weeks from now is it really going to matter? And I think it's important for us to find some time to just get those things out of your head for just a little bit. And you mentioned the fasting thing from the get-go. That is my most focused prayer time. And I mean, I think about um, Jesus. I love how it says, Jesus fasted in the desert. In the Gospel of Luke, it says at the end of his 40 days fasting, he was hungry. And it's like, thanks, Luke. Yeah, of course he was. But there's something so profound in self-denial on any form. And like, I understand there might be a reason that you can't fast from food or something, but for a lot of us, it's just because it's hard, like it's difficult to do. But for me, it is such a clarifying time. I think of the words of Jesus. Man doesn't live by bread alone. Like we don't live by bread alone. And that time that I get to have that focused prayer, it is a reminder of that. And it's that self-denial piece that I would say weekly helps to purify my heart.
How many, so you're preaching through this series, how many people do you think in your congregation are going to be clearing out their closets? Are you
I
hearing any story?
definitely, it was interesting. It's the first time I've had somebody come up and say to me, is a guy, he's from Sweden, and he was just saying, man, you're really brave for preaching. I've never heard somebody tell me I was brave for preaching something, but he said, you're really brave for preaching here, because he's like, it is everywhere here. Like it's just in the air. Like it's just always about more and more in abundance and all that. I think it's been very convicting for me. Um, like the speech stuff, especially, like, 'cause I as I mentioned, when you have an 8-year-old, it feels like real parenting. I mean, before that, it feels like childcare. I'm not saying that it's not hard. It's also very hard. But when you get to the point of like, oh, why can't I have a phone, or peer pressure and all these types of things, and then like just you kind of want to force your kid to be a certain way. Like a good example, my son just doesn't care about baseball. I love baseball, and it's like one of those things I want to just say, like, oh, I'll be fine when it doesn't matter. He can do what he wants. But like when it's actually like, man, he just doesn't care. It's like that's a little hard for me, to be honest. And like it's very, very convicting to think about, like, all right, how can I um, be who God has called me to be, live with that focus, and then that'll ultimately be a great blessing to him and everybody that I love and care about the most.
Yeah. Would you mind, like in the spirit of your message on simplicity and things and in speech, would you mind kind of praying over that for those who are listening, the churches that we represent?
Yeah.
Essentially, like asking for deliverance from that, I would say probably, on a demonic spirit or fleshly desire
Hmm.
to have accumulate these things or say these things that end up imprisoning us.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'd be so, I mean, and one reflection that I said, shared with the church, is like when people visit countries that are struggling, what's always amazing is just the joy. And it's like, I went on a mission trip and I saw these kids and they were all just playing with a tire, and they were having, it was like the joy of their life. And that's like what everybody comes back and says. And it's just important for us to think about that. And you said it well, there is a stronghold on all of us
Yeah,
that we have to consider.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
let me pray for us. God, I pray over myself first and foremost, but everybody who's part of this conversation, who one day maybe watching it. And I wish we could all just have coffee together. But God,
Hmm.
I pray, what is something for all of us, reveal something in all of us right now, and help us to take a step towards you in whatever that is. It might be a really small step at first. But God, as we think about stuff, as we think about speech, it's ways that we worship gods that aren't you. And we need your deliverance. Father, I pray for all the congregations that are represented. Imagine the change in all of these places. we all just lived a little more free. We all gave up some of the sense of control that we have. Father, bless us as we just ask you, what is that next thing? So we can purify our hearts and so we can see you. Thank you for this time and the opportunity to be with my brothers and sisters here. And we are all blessed by this ministry. And I pray for those who have put it together to be strengthened, because they deserve to be greatly encouraged for this work. Your son, Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, everybody. Great to be with you guys.